Hi everyone and welcome back to Scale Studio. Today we're going to be building the AFV Club Israeli Centurion Sho't Mark V-1, a predecessor to the famous Sho't Cal. Also, I recorded this several months ago, so if it's not fantastic in some places, please keep this in mind. If you want to see anything else that I did not show, check out my previous build videos. I'll make a playlist so you can find them easily. But without further ado, let's get building. So we're going to start off by assembling the bogies, and there are 6 of them total, 3 to a side. They are multi-part assemblies that can actually be workable if you're careful. I chose to keep them semi-workable. Some of them are and some of them aren't, depending on their assembly, because there's 4 and then there's 2, and there's 2 separate types. After that, start by actually texturing everything. So I built very basic stuff without adding details and then textured from there. It made it a lot easier. And for those who aren't familiar with this technique, it's just thinned down to me a standard putty with some acetone, and then I'm just stippling it onto the surface. This makes it look like rolled steel plates or even cast steel if you're careful. And this is going to be repeated throughout the whole build. So if you understand it now, then you'll be able to figure out what I'm doing for the rest of the build, basically. This is probably the easiest technique you can use to make a really good looking tank. And it's just thinning down some putty and then stippling it on like you can see I'm doing here. So now before I do anything else with this model, I want to make something clear. The British actually really made a nice tank in the Centurion. I am doing heavy texturing and flame cuts and welds a little bit more emphasized because of the scale. It'll help it look more realistic. The British actually had a really clean look to their tank. Of course, model making is part art and part historic accuracy, and for the most part, this is historically accurate, except for the the cuts here. Other than that, it should be mostly accurate, and you guys don't need to copy this. It's just a point of personal preference. As you can see, I'm doing small cuts over and over and over again into the side of the plate to make it look like it is it's been cut out by a blowtorch. Now, everything else is basic, at least for the upper hull, basic assembly. So you can see that I'm assembling the engine deck here, and then putting it on. The engine deck was a little tough to get right because I put the back engine armor plate on a little bit too far forward, so it didn't look super. It wasn't 100% accurate. So just make sure that you've got a little bit of an indent with that plate, so that the 2 side plates actually poke out a little bit a ways in the back. This is something I noticed after I put it on, so it was a little late. Now, after I did some more texturing on the sides, I worked on putting the turret ring on, and actually this fit really well. The AFV Club kit actually surprised me a lot. I thought that there was going to be a lot less well-fitting parts, but most of the stuff actually went together really nicely. There was a little bit of flash, but once you cleaned it off, usually you could get it together without any filler. I don't think I had to use any filler on this model, which is it's awesome. It fits, I wouldn't say like a Tamiya kit, but it has much more detail. So I think it's a good trade-off. I'm definitely going to be doing more of these in the future. Now, one thing I tried to do on this model is think ahead. So since I knew I wanted a weld seam on the bottom of the front plate, and I wanted to put uh, torch cuts in it, I did not put the plate on, but I made a little chamfer on the outside edge so that you can roll a piece of epoxy putty into it and then put a weld seam in that. That actually really helped once I was welding, which unfortunately I forgot to film. So if you guys want to see that, go back and watch my Stug video. That's actually a pretty good example of welding. But yeah, as you can see, I put all of the weld cut or the torch cuts in it, and then I put the torch cuts also along the top of the front plate, and then I attached the plate and it had a groove for me to put the weld seam in. So that worked actually really well. Now once the hull was finished and textured, except for the fenders, which we'll do in a little bit, I started working on the turret. Now these pieces actually fit pretty decently. They're a little hard to get aligned, but if you clean off the flash and sprue gates, they'll actually fit together pretty well. So as you can see, once I cleaned it off, it actually fit like really nicely, and I was able to glue it in from there. And then because we're retexturing it as usual, I'm not going to be filling anything. That'll take care of itself. Now, since the turret has a cast texture, I used the same technique. It was just there was a lot more putty uh, put onto the model in the first place, so it was a bit heavier. And when you stippled it, it rose up a little bit more and gave a heavier texture to it, which is accurate for a cast turret. Um, I think that I actually got the turret pretty close to what the original looked like. Um, of course, it is in scale, so it's a little bit different, but it looks close enough that I think it passes quite well. Once it was dry, I sanded out the rough spots that were really sharp and pointy, which wouldn't be accurate, off with, I think this is 600 or 1000 grit sandpaper. I went a little bit heavy on this one. I think that it would have benefited from a little bit of a lighter approach, but I think it turned out all right in the end. If I were you, I would get probably 1200 to polish casting texture and rolled steel texture. Now, the stowage bins on the side, as well as some of the turret, have a bunch of handles on them. And before they were just a little molded piece of plastic that was completely solid. Um, I'm not super happy with that, and so I cut them all off, drilled 2 holes, and slid a loop of wire in there. This isn't at all the most accurate way to do this. If I was redoing this model kit now, I would have done it accurately, since it's supposed to be a loop and then 2 flanges on the end instead of going into the box. But I think for what it is, it looks completely fine. Now, what's really nice about this kit is it actually came with a metal gun barrel. So all you had to do was actually put it in, because it was designed for the kit, which was awesome. Then you put on the plastic muzzle brake, fume extractor, excuse me, and that's all you have to do. It's actually a really convenient way to do it. I wish more modeling companies would. But at the moment, it doesn't seem like that's going to happen. Now for the turret, it came with pre-molded wires for different functions, but I decided to replace those with metal ones that I just kind of routed along the same path. For some reason, I either don't have the footage or forgot to film this. Remember, I actually built this right after we finished the Tiger series, so it's not exactly what I'm up to now. But one cool modification I did make was basically a rack that I saw on Prime Portal that went around the whole turret. It seemed like it was for stowage or something, but it was on the Mark V, and I'm building a Mark V 1, so I'm hoping that it still applies. It may be a field modification. So this was before I was actually good at filming what I am doing in the model, and so I actually didn't film finishing this. Of course, that's not something that would hopefully happen now, but this was back when I was building the Tiger. So as you can see, I'm drilling out holes, and I'll try to explain it to you as well as I can, but I'm drilling out 4 holes on that side, 2 holes on the top, and then 3 on the other side. And basically, each of those holes is a support bar for a piece of metal that stuck out of the turret and supported a loop of steel that went all the way around the whole turret. You'll be able to see kind of an example of this in later shots, but basically I put pieces of styrene in all of the holes except for the last 2, so the end 2 of the loop, and those were anchor holes for the wire. I think that this little detail makes the model really unique and cool. If you guys want to do it, it's on Prime Portal. I think it's the green tank. I don't know exactly. I can link it in the description. But as you can see, I'm putting a piece of styrene rod, clipping it off, and it's not an exact height, it's just getting it there. And then after that, I put in a piece of wire over the top and super glued it down. And that was actually a huge pain in the butt. I should have used lead wire, but I used copper instead. So that was a mistake. So after I struggled through that, I decided that I wanted to put a canvas cover on the gun mantlet. And the issue with the Centurion gun mantlet is that the cover, at least for it, it's actually pretty complex, and I hadn't done enough research to know so. So I thought that putting a flat piece of epoxy putty over the whole thing would actually be okay. That obviously is not the case. I should have just gotten the aftermarket mantlet that you can buy from AFV Club, because it's way better detailed, but we're gonna have to live with it, and we'll see what we can do with it. I think it'll be okay. But but you'll see how bad it is in a couple seconds. I wasn't able to film the whole thing again because this was my first time and I was kind of stressing about it. So yeah, I promise better results in the future, or at least try to promise better results in the future. Now, for the shot, Israeli shot, there are two jerry can holders on the back that are supposed to be level with each other. So I took a piece of stretch sprue because it's pretty inconspicuous, and I just leveled it out with where I wanted it to line up. Uh, Basically, this is my guide. So once that dried, I was able to place the jerry can holders right on top of it, and they lined up perfectly. It was actually a good way to do it. Um, and I'd recommend doing it because you can't tell at all uh, that there's a piece of stretch sprue under the jerry can holders once they're in place. Now the set did come with clear periscopes, so for the ones that had a lens that I wanted to stay clear, I put little pieces of masking tape over them. And I think these were like point or 7.4 millimeter or 3 millimeter by 2 millimeter or something like that. And once they're installed, they stuck really well, but they are a pain in the butt to install. So if you don't want to do some kind of annoying masking, don't do this model kit. There were some other issues with the instruction book where it told you to put a in-turret periscope in without the base, as you can see here. So it's just the clear part sitting above, and that's actually not what it should be. It should have a little base that looks like this. It's pretty distinctive. You'll be able to find it in the kit. I can't remember what part it is, but it's used for the driver's hatch periscopes as well. And then you just attach them, and you can put that in the turret, and that actually looks okay and accurate. It isn't just floating there. So as you can see when you put it in, there we go. So much more realistic, and yeah, you'd probably get in trouble at a model show if you didn't put that in. Now next up is the gun, which I actually built the little mounting point for with some styrene, and then I just slid the actual gun on top. This is a 50 cal M2 machine gun, and I actually decided that I'm going to keep it off for the final product so I can kind of weather that area, and we can speculate that it maybe was damaged by combat, and they have to fix it, or they're getting a replacement and they don't want to just leave this piece of junk sitting there. So it's off for the moment for maintenance, at least at the time of my model. Then we get to some of the very small pieces of photo etch, and the only photo etch were really for the gun, and then these fender bars, and then a little bit more in other places. I can't remember exactly where they went, but they weren't really that helpful. If you want a super detailed model, I think you can probably get a Voyager set or Edward set for it, but it's really not necessary. So now that most of the model, like the tank itself, is built, we're going to move on to the road wheels and the running gear. So the drive sprockets had the sprue gates inside of the pins, which is a little tough, but if you have a round sandpaper piece, that's fine. or sanding stick like I had. The assembly for the road wheels themselves is really easy. You just put the uh, polycap vinyl, I guess, piece of rubber on the wheels, and that's that. You really don't need to do anything else. I attached this one return roller right now because I wanted to keep it out of the way and didn't want to lose it since it's absolutely tiny. After that, I super glued the tracks together and was able to put them onto the tank. Now, finalizing some details on the Centurion tank itself, not the running gear, we have the smoke grenade launchers, and I actually drilled out a couple of the holes on these. Again, this was a while ago, and I did not make them very straight, but the painting and weathering and everything is current, so you guys are going to get new techniques there. So make sure to stick around. This is not going to be all old footage. Now, it came with a resin part, but I decided to use the plastic one because it was so much better detailed, and the resin part was really terribly cast. And actually, they're both okay to use. They've been used in different versions. Both a Mark V version, just 0.1 or 0.2, depending from what I've seen. Then I used 7 strands of really, really thin, I think 28 gauge wire, twisted it up and replaced the string that they gave us with those. You'll be able to see it in the final picture, but yeah, basically you just take it and then twist it up, no problem. You'll see, if you watch Plasma, you'll know how to do it. But that's all we have for today. Hopefully you guys found the techniques, even if they are a little bit antiquated, useful. And if you guys enjoyed the video, please let me know by leaving a like and a comment down below. And if you haven't already, please subscribe because it helps me out a ton and you'll be able to see more of this. If you do want to help me out, join my awesome Patreons over on my Patreon page. Link will be in the description and probably on screen. So thank you guys so much for watching and have a great week.